There are only 4 webcams currently on the market that I would consider buying. If you just want my quick picks, then click the timestamp below. The primary attributes to consider when buying a webcam are price, specifications, image quality, convenience, and software. Now, I own over 20 webcams, but instead of wasting your time and demonstrating footage of every single one, I'm just going to cut to which perform the best in each category and then give my recommendation on the best budget and best premium option at the end. So the first thing to consider is price. And if you're on a budget, there's really only one webcam on the market that I consider. It's the Logitech C920 or any of its variants like the C920S or C920X. Whichever one you find cheaper, and I have a specific video comparing the different variants to each other. Now, I bought my original Logitech C920s for $50, and for that price, I still haven't found any other webcam that has come close to the quality that those provide. It doesn't look amazing, but it's not offensive either. If you're just using it for Zoom or video conferencing, even if you're going to be streaming on Twitch with your face full screen, it's just not an offensive looking image if you have enough light. Now, when it comes to premium devices, the ranges are pretty extreme. There's the Razer Kiyo Pro that I'm recording on right now. This launched for $200 and I've seen it lately for $100. And there's even devices that launched at up to $250 like the AverMedia PW513, though it has gone down in price significantly since then. Now, personally, I like to stay under $150 because if you spend more than that, if you're getting close to like the $200 or $250 range, then for double the price of like $250, you can get a $500 real camera that is giving you way more than double the image quality and performance. So something like the Canon M200, or if you spend more, maybe the Sony ZV-1 if you get it used, you just get image quality on those that no webcam can compete with. So the Logitech Brio is generally around $150. And this is a really good sweet spot. And I don't think that you really get significant improvements in image quality over the Brio if you pay more money anyway. Now, the most important attribute of any webcam is the image quality. And that can be broken down into several other aspects. Sharpness and clarity is the main thing I look for in a webcam's image. How much detail is there and how clear is it? In terms of sharpness, I have 2 webcams tied for this, the Nexago N970p and the Logitech Brio, which I just showed previously. Both of these webcams are capable of 4K 30 frames per second. Now, the Logitech Brio can also do 1080p 60 frames per second. You can go lower than that, but the Nexago, just keep in mind that it doesn't do 60 frames per second at all. Even if you're bringing down 1080p, it'll only do 30 frames per second. Now, while I do have these devices tied when it comes to sharpness and overall clarity, I give the edge to the Nexago N970p. Now just look at the CRT back there, or even this black shirt. You'll see a lot of grain, a lot of that static. And once you really pay attention, you can see it all over the entire shot in the Logitech Brio. Not so much in the Nexago N970p. They have a really good noise reduction filter that you can alter with the remote. You can change a ton of different settings with this, and I'll get into this in a bit. Now, with the noise reduction filter off, it's going to look very similar to the Brio, but with it on, it actually decreases a lot of that grain without really having much impact on the overall sharpness and clarity of the image. Now, 2 devices that I would avoid if sharpness is your main priority are the Razer Kiyo Pro and Elgato Facecam. Now, the Kiyo Pro maxes out at 1080p 60 frames per second, and it has minimal grain, but as you can see, the image is super soft. And I suspect the reason for this is because there actually is a noise reduction filter applied to the image. It's just something that you can't customize. The Elgato Facecam is another device that's not very sharp, but it's still pretty grainy with a noise reduction filter that just makes the image look soft by default, and it doesn't do much at all when there's not a lot of light. Facecam caps out 1080p 60 frames per second as well. Now, there's 2 other 4K webcams that are usable, but that I'd pass on. First, there's the AverMedia Live Streamer Cam 513 or PW513. This webcam actually is pretty sharp, but its low light performance is just not that good. It's going to be really grainy, even more grainy than the Logitech Brio, unless you decrease the shutter speed really low so that there's going to be a lot of motion blur when you're moving, or unless you crank the ISO up, which makes the grain increase even more. Also, the colors on this are awful, but that's for a different section. The Dell Ultra Sharp webcam is another 4K webcam that just unfortunately doesn't look quite as sharp as the Nexago N970p or the Logitech Brio, and this also has pretty abysmal colors, which leads us to the next section. Color accuracy definitely goes to the Razer Kiyo Pro. It's the only webcam that actually can kind of rival traditional cameras when it comes to colors. Not only is the color science good, but it sends through uncompressed 1080p 60 frames per second footage in the YUY2 video format. This is an uncompressed format. Most webcams, once they get past 1080p 30 frames per second, if they're at 1080 60 or 4K 30, they're sending through MJPEG, which is motion JPEG. And if you've ever used a JPEG file, you know this is much smaller, much more compressed compared to like a PNG. So the same thing goes with video. You lose a lot of the information as far as the colors, and I can actually show you a quick example of that. Right now, I'm using the Logitech Brio and it's at MJPEG 4K 30 frames per second, but let me drop this down to 1080p 30 frames per second. Now the Brio is at 1080p 30 frames per second, but it's at the YUY2 video format and the colors have drastically changed. There's a lot more of the orange and brown that really should be in my skin. And this is just what happens when you have uncompressed video going through. Now, even at 4K 30 frames per second, which is what I set the Brio back to, it does do a decent job. Nothing is like super crazy offensive. There is just too much red and there are some colors missing. It's slightly better than this, the Nexago N970p. The blacks and the greens are kind of off. My shirt looks like a little bit of a green tint. Same with that CRT back there. Everything just has like a little bit of a greenish haze, and I altered the colors quite a bit to really get them as accurate as I possibly could. And I saw this in another video from Lodo Tech. He also had the same kind of issue. There are really great settings to alter the colors of this device, but you're really just trying to fix stuff and you can't get quite to look as good as the Logitech Brio and not anywhere close to the Razer Kiyo Pro. Now, dynamic range is related to color, but more specifically, it's how much detail is retained in the darkest and lightest parts of a shot. So here I'd say all three of the top premium webcams, the Brio, the Nexago N970p, and the Razer Kiyo Pro, all do a pretty good job here when the settings are tweaked properly. But I would give the advantage to the Logitech Brio in first place just because it can take more light. If I have all my lights that are on pretty bright right now, it can take more of that without super overexposing hotspots. Now, it would appear that the Nexago does an even better job of this. Like if you look at the back, there's not quite as much of that glow, but the problem is, in order to do that, I had to like decrease the contrast a bit, which was fine. I do that to all the different devices. I'm really familiar with tweaking the different settings, but if you stretch out that contrast a bit, then you have that green. That's what really starts to show up. So you have to like increase the contrast to make the darks look blacker and just really deep, harsh shadows. In other words, for the Nexago, you have to make everything either super dark or when you get detail in the shadows, it's gonna look a little bit green. Now the Razer Kiyo Pro is in third place. It doesn't do a terrible job, but I actually dropped the contrast all the way to 0. So it didn't make my shirt look like completely pitch black because it's really not that dark. And by dropping the contrast that much, it makes everything a little bit pale. So I had to increase the saturation. I had to fix a lot of things. So the colors are just a little bit off because of that. And even still, I think that the contrast is a little bit too much. I think the blacks are a little bit too deep. Now, what you can do is you can use the HDR functionality of the Razer Kiyo Pro, but it's really just taking each frame. So you'd be at 60 frames per second, and then it would turn to a 30 frames per second video by stitching each frame together. And the problem with that is the image gets a lot softer, even softer than it already is by default. And then you get a little bit of like chromatic aberration going on, and you have to be very precise with the settings. Otherwise, things are just going to look like super out of whack. You'll have colors that are just like totally incorrect. And I've talked about this in my other Razer Kiyo Pro videos. And honestly, as long as you don't get either of these two devices, the Razer Kiyo or the Logitech StreamCam, then you should be pretty good as far as dynamic range. It's not like these are completely terrible devices. It's just that when there's like a hotspot from the sun or you have really bright concentrated lights, these things just don't like that at all. Now, autofocus was something that was taken completely for granted on webcams for years, but then a few devices came out. The AverMedia PW513, the Elgato Facecam, and this device, the Nexago N970p. These all have fixed focus lenses, meaning there's no autofocus or manual focus. So if I like held this up to the camera, it will never change its focus. It will always be blurry if I have it close up. And if there's anything too far, then that's going to be blurry as well. But since the aperture, since the interest people of webcams is so small, I've talked about that in a different video, you can really see things pretty sharply all the way to the back of my room. So being too far is not too much of an issue, but if you want to show something up close, like a hand cam or something like that, not really going to work on a fixed focus device. Most webcams just have pretty passable autofocus. Like this is the Logitech Brio. Hold something up to this, it'll take a while. And yeah, it will focus on it. Then it might take a while to get back to me. It's just passable. It's okay. Contrast based autofocus. For a lot of them, I can just set them to manual and just zoom the focus all the way out and then just call it a day. But there are some webcams like this, the Razer Kiyo Pro, that really struggle when it comes to speed of the autofocus and just keeping track of my face. They pulse in and out. So if I'm like moving, even if it's just side to side and it's not actually coming forward or closer, it pulses quite a bit, the Razer Kiyo Pro. Now, apparently they fixed that issue in newer batches, but I got a first edition batch of this. So yeah, mine has that issue and I can't actually download firmware to fix it. Otherwise it'll break the entire device. So yeah, honestly, I don't really have any specific suggestions when it comes to autofocus. Just know that if you need it, then just don't get a device that has fixed focus. And also know that the Razer Kiyo Pro probably has the worst autofocus, at least the first edition batches of any device that I've used. Now, field of view is how wide a shot is. This is mostly down to personal preference or use cases. This is the Logitech C920, which has a field of view of 78 degrees. I believe this is 80-degree field of view, and this is the Razer Kiyo Pro, so similar to the C920. Let me go ahead and bring the C920 down so you can see. All right, so now I'm holding the Logitech C920. It's going to be a little bit shaky at about the same distance as the Logitech Brio. This is at a 78-degree field of view, but the Brio, here we go, with a 90-degree field of view. And then next to go at 970p, a 91-degree field of view. So you just see a lot more of the shot. My face isn't so super zoomed in, which I find to be really important if you're like using it like on a laptop, so you're not like super close to it. Because if you're like typing on your keyboard and you're like right up, hey, I'm on a Zoom call, I was like, what's going on? It's like, ugh, just, you know what I mean? So the Logitech Brio gets you zoomed out a whole lot more. I love that. And same thing goes with the Nexigo. Now, one issue with this really zoomed out image is it picks up a lot of the background. This is the Nexigo right now, and just my background, as you can see, it's incredibly cluttered. And I can't just blur it out like I can with the mirrorless camera by widening the aperture. Can't do that on webcams. Fortunately, you can still crop into the image and you can get a pretty decently sharp shot still. So I can zoom in on the image right here with the Nexigo, and I can actually move up. And I can, you know, pan and stuff just with this remote that comes with the device. So if you didn't want it to pick up that much of the background, then you can control that. It's way more easy with this. With the other devices like the Logitech Brio, which I'll switch over to, you have to like open OBS and do all that stuff. And it's like quite a pain, to be 100% honest with you. But I'll be talking about the software in a little bit. So let me go ahead and zoom this back out. And just keep in mind that that is a digital zoom. So you're actually losing some resolution, but since it was at 4K, you are retaining a lot of sharpness. So considering all those different aspects of image quality, here are my top picks when it comes to image quality. Number one is the Nexigo N970p, this webcam, because of its sharpness, but also low grain, which is done with the excellent noise reduction software that they have. Second is the Logitech Brio, has slightly better colors than the Nexigo, but the grain is kind of over the top. Once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. And then there's the Razer Kiyo Pro, which has way better colors than both of those devices, better colors than any webcam that I've used, honestly, but it maxes out at 1080p 60 frames per second, can't do 4K at all, and the sharpness for a 1080p webcam for a 1080 device, period, it's really just not there. Now, build quality isn't something that I put a whole lot of stock into. I don't really care if a device is made of glass or plastic or metal or anything like that, but convenience is something that is very important to me. So the first thing I'll say is, if possible, get a webcam that has a long wire. This is the Elgato face cam right here, and the wire, I don't remember exactly how long. I could probably put it on the screen because I wrote them all down, but it's a sufficiently long wire. The Logitech Brio has a long wire. The Nexigo also. The only problem with the Nexigo is it's type B, like a large type B that goes in the back. And the Brio, they have a type C that goes in the front, and a type C that's like in the webcam itself. And then it's a type A 3.0 that's at the end. And having adjustability, like being able to swivel it, and then also having like a tripod mount on the bottom. And this is the Elgato face cam. It has this clip that's for the privacy. It has a privacy cover. So it just does a lot of things really well as far as being able to adjust this and then keep it safe. And I really love the adjustability of this. I'd say of all the webcams I've used, the best build quality does go to the Elgato Facecam as far as convenience is concerned. And then the Razer Kiyo Pro is next, but the problem is that wire is really short. You can probably get another one, but that wire is actually pretty high quality. It's just too short of a wire. Now, quickly, software. And honestly, this is more of a PSA than anything. I think pretty much every webcam software sucks, and I would avoid using it because they conflict with OBS, they conflict with like Zoom and other things. They try to take over the webcam. I'd say the only software that I'd say is like really legit and good, it doesn't conflict with any other software, is from the Nexigo N970p. Nexigo might have other devices that can do this as well, but this actually just brings up a menu. I'll go ahead and show you. If I bring up the Nexigo, this just brings up a menu by pressing the button, and then you can change the settings right on the device itself. So I don't even have to go in OBS. I can change the shutter speed. I can change this again, but it's the gain, and that's really awesome that you can do these things like right on the device itself using the remote. And these save to the device. You can save it with different presets. You have a ton of control when it comes to the colors. Like these are all my specific colors. This is not what it looks like by default. You can change the noise reduction. Like the settings are amazing that this has. Not only are the settings great and it gives you more control than any of the other devices that I've used, but that saves, you can save these to the different presets. So I've saved this to preset number 1. I'll talk more in detail about this in my full Nexigo N970p review. You can zoom in and out just by using the remote. You can pan, you can tilt, you can do all that stuff just by using the remote itself. And I just love that about this software. Now, Elgato also has some decent software. I think some of the ways that they do the presets at the beginning, like when you first plug it in, a little bit misleading. They say that the noise reduction filter is off, but it's really on. I wish there was a way to like dock it inside of OBS so you don't have to have them both running at the same time. But overall, I think that software is pretty good. It was pretty buggy and it crashed a lot, and there was some freezing when it first came out, but they've continued to improve that software. So I think that software is good. I just find that it would be so much better and so much cooler if there was something like Nexago where you don't even have to open other software. You just right in the camera itself, you control all these right on the screen. It just brings up a screen right here. Boom, boom, you're done. So with all this criteria considered, what is the best webcam on the market? First of all, if you're on a budget, I would just get the Logitech C920 or any of its variants like the C920S or C920X. But aside from that, in third place, I give to the Razer Kiyo Pro. Really look out for this thing when it's on major sales, like for Prime Day and Black Friday. I've seen this thing as low as $100. Again, it launched for $200. It has great colors, 1080p, 60 frames per second, uncompressed, YUI2. And I give second place to this, the Logitech Brio. This has been my main webcam for years, and it was the best webcam on the market since it came out. And it just somewhat recently got surpassed by what I put at number 1. It's still a great webcam. I just find a few things annoying about it. It does forget its settings, just like most of the webcams I talked about. I didn't really get too deep in that, but a lot of the webcams, they forget their settings when you restart your PC or when you plug it out and plug it back in. And the grain, that's the main issue that I have. The grain is over the top, and once you see it, you just can't stop seeing it. And it's like, it's one of the main things that really like pushed me to go get my main camera, which is my Sony ZV-1. And in first place, the new best webcam on the market is this, the Nexago N970p. The sharpness is on par with the Logitech Brio, but overall it looks clear because of the excellent noise reduction filter that they have on, and is customizable. Doesn't have to be too strong, doesn't have to be too weak. You can tune it perfectly. The colors are slightly worse, but you do have a lot of flexibility to tweak them, more flexibility than you get in any other webcam. But honestly, the best part about this device to me is the software and this remote that it comes with. You actually have to get some AAA batteries to go with this. It doesn't come with those, but the remote is amazing. Really, the only thing holding this device back is the price. It launched for about $200 or so. I know I was procrastinating because I saw it for like $220 or something like that initially. And I was like, I don't really want to take a chance on it. Also, it came out in, I believe, October of 2021, which is when webcams really started declining as far as popularity. They're still great. It's just that people were able to actually get them in stock, and there were a lot of other webcams from a lot of different companies. So again, the new best webcam on the market, the Nexago N970p. Links to all the devices that I talked about are below. Now, there are two things that I did not mention in this video on purpose. One is microphone audio quality. The mics on all of these are their webcam mics. So I generally have demonstrations of them in my individual reviews, but they would all really just hurt your ears, honestly. If you're interested in getting one that's good and even cheap, I have a full USB microphone buyer's guide. If it's not already up, it should be up within a week or so. Another thing is these webcams suffer when it comes to low light performance, when there's like no lighting at all. If there's just natural lighting, or if it's a really dim light and you just have an overhead light on. I'm going to be working on some new lighting videos soon, but I've reviewed all the lights that I'm using right now. If you want to get a similar setup, I have an Elgato ring light in front of me. I have an Elgato key light, a newer 18-inch advanced ring light, and then a newer 18-inch ring light behind me, just regular, not advanced, just for a backlight. Again, links to everything I talked about are below.